You aren't even close to my mother, my daughter-in-law scoffed. I pushed my seat away and… Lyle was 70, and she had learned to read a room the way a seamstress reads fabric. By the tension, by the pull, by the way something beautiful can still hide a tear until you lift it into the light. That night, the dining room felt too bright, too quiet, and too sharp around the edges. The custard she'd made sat in its glass bowl like a small offering, pale and hopeful beneath a dusting of cinnamon. She had stirred it slowly, the way she used to stir soup when her boy was 5 and feverish and scared. She had done it because love, for her, had always been something you made with your hands. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Her son, Jonah, sat across from her with his shoulders tight, his smile arriving late to every moment as if it had to wade through worry before it reached his face. Next to him, Elise perched in her chair like a guest who couldn't decide if she was insulted by the invitation or proud of the power it gave her. Elise wore a sleek green dress and earrings that caught the light every time she turned her head, which was often. She looked around Mara's home with the same expression people used in thrift stores when they were deciding what was worth saving and what could be tossed. Mara had lived in that house for 3 decades. It wasn't grand, but it was solid. The dining table had scratches in the varnish from homework and spilled juice and 1,000 little meals. The cabinet held china that only came out when the moment mattered. The walls were crowded with photographs because Mara believed memories deserved space to breathe. Elise believed the opposite. Elise believed empty walls were elegant, and that silence was a kind of status. The dinner had been a slow series of pinpricks. Elise commented on the lighting, the smell of the candle, the pattern on the curtains, the age of the chairs, the fact that Mara still had doilies on the side table, like a museum display. Jonah laughed too loudly after Elise's remarks, like he was trying to smooth over wrinkles by pressing harder, and every laugh sounded like a small betrayal. Mara kept her face gentle. She answered politely. She poured water. She asked about Jonah's week. She nodded when Elise talked about her mother. Vera, glamorous Vera, the woman who owned a boutique marketing firm and posted photos of rooftop lunches and ocean getaways. Elise said Vera's name like it was a title. Mara said it like a person. By the time Mara brought out the dessert, her patience had thinned the way old thread does, still useful but ready to snap if pulled too suddenly. She placed the custard in the center of the table and set 3 spoons beside it. Jonah's eyes flicked up, a spark of something softer appearing for a moment. Mara saw the child in him, the boy who used to scrape the bowl and lick the spoon while she pretended not to notice. She almost relaxed. Elise didn't reach for her spoon. She looked at the custard as if it had offended her. "Is this what you always make?" Elise asked, her voice light and sweet in the way sugar can cover bitterness. "It's Jonah's favorite," Mara said. "He loved it when he was little." Elise gave a small laugh and leaned back. The movement was effortless, practiced, the way someone sits back when they're ready to watch a show. She looked at Mara with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You know," Elise said, "you're really not half the woman my mother is." The words fell into the room with a weight that seemed impossible for something spoken so casually. Mara felt her breath catch, the spoon in her hand pausing midair. Jonah's face drained of color so quickly it was startling. For a second, no one moved. Even the clock on the wall seemed louder, each tick a small accusation. Mara heard the sentence again in her mind, as if her brain needed to replay it to believe it was real. Not half the woman. Not half. The comparison wasn't just cruel, it was designed to make Mara feel small, designed to make her shrink back into the role Elise preferred for her. The background helper, the useful older woman who provided comfort and labor and money, then disappeared when she wasn't needed. Mara's hands were steady when she set the spoon down. She didn't know where the steadiness came from. Maybe it had been building for months, stitched together from swallowed comments and forced smiles and little humiliations she had pretended didn't matter. Elise continued, emboldened by the silence. "My mom built a real life. She's independent. She has standards. She doesn't settle. She wouldn't live like this." Elise waved her hand toward the room as if dismissing the entire house, the entire history inside it. She wouldn't let her son struggle the way Jonah has. Jonah flinched at his name. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked down at his plate like it might offer instructions. Elise, he murmured weakly, like a man pleading with a storm. That weak plea landed harder than Elise's insult. Because it wasn't a defense. It was management. Jonah wasn't outraged on his mother's behalf. He was just trying to keep the evening from breaking open. Mara's heart thudded once, hard, in her chest. She thought of her hands, how they had ached for years, how her joints stiffened in the cold, how she wore gloves in winter not for fashion but because pain had become another layer of daily life. She thought of mornings spent bent over fabric, nights spent stitching under a lamp while Jonah slept, weekends spent taking extra alterations because a client begged for a rush job. She thought of saying yes, so often she had forgotten the shape of no. Elise's smile sharpened. "I'm not trying to be mean," she said, which is what people say when they're trying to be mean and want credit for honesty. "I'm just telling the truth. My mother is. Then she can start paying your rent," Mara said. The sentence came out before Mara had fully decided to speak, and the moment it landed, the air changed. Jonah's head snapped up. Elise blinked as if she hadn't understood the words. "What?" Jonah said. Mara met her son's eyes. For a heartbeat, she saw the little boy again, but it was the boy caught sneaking cookies, not the boy who used to run to her for safety. "If Vera is so superior," Mara said, "then let her help you." Jonah's face tightened. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Elise's smile faltered, then returned in a brittle version. "Sure." She stopped and corrected herself with exaggerated politeness. "Mara, that's not necessary. You don't need to be dramatic." Mara leaned forward slightly, her voice calm now, almost conversational. "Dramatic is comparing someone's worth to their mother at the dinner table. I'm just being practical." Jonah's fingers curled around his glass. "Mom," he said again louder, "what do you mean, rent?" Mara let the silence stretch just long enough to feel it pull. She wanted them to sit in it, to taste it, to understand what it was like to be left alone with consequences. "You didn't tell him," Mara said to Elise, and when Elise stared back, Mara turned her gaze to Jonah. "For 6 months, I've been paying the apartment rent." The words dropped like stones. Jonah's glass tilted in his hand and water sloshed onto the table. He didn't notice. Elise's face went blank, then slowly rearranged itself into disbelief. "The landlord." Mara finished gently. "The arrangement where you said he was giving you time?" Jonah's mouth opened and closed. His eyes moved quickly, searching Mara's face for the joke, the trick, the misunderstanding. Mara continued, still calm. $900 on the 5th of every month. Plus the transfer fee because your landlord insists on it. $1,000. Every month. Elise made a sound, small, sharp, almost like a gasp swallowed. "No," she said. "No, that can't be right." Jonah's voice cracked. "Mom, why would you?" "Because you came to me crying," Mara said, and the calmness in her voice was the most frightening thing about her now. "Because you said you lost your job and you were scared. Because you said you didn't even have enough for groceries. Because you looked at me with those eyes you used to have when you were small and you said, 'Please.'" Elise's hands went to her lap, gripping the napkin. Her eyes darted to Jonah as if she could pin the blame onto him like a label. "You never told me this," she hissed. Jonah looked like he might be sick. He swallowed. "I didn't want you to worry." Elise's laugh was thin. "Worry? Jonah, I bought a new handbag last month." Mara watched them, the way you watch a curtain being pulled back to reveal an ugly wall. She felt something both painful and relieving. Proof. Proof that she had not imagined the disrespect. Proof that the ease with which they spent money hadn't been a misunderstanding or a phase. It had been an entitlement to wear perfume. "I didn't tell you because I thought it would help you stand up again," Mara said to Jonah. "I thought it would be temporary. I thought you would be ashamed enough to fix things quickly. But instead you let her sit at my table and talk to me like I'm nothing." Elise tried to recover, as if composure were a weapon she could still wield. "Mara, listen, I didn't know. Jonah never said. And that makes it better? Mara asked. Her tone stayed soft, but it carried an edge sharp enough to cut through excuses. You insulted me without knowing I was paying for your roof. Imagine how comfortable you would have been insulting me if you had known. Jonah took a step toward Mara, palms open. Mom, please. This is getting out of control. Mara looked at her son's hands, and for a moment she remembered them small and sticky with candy, reaching for her. She remembered holding them while crossing streets, while walking him into school, while guiding him through life. Those hands were grown now, and they were still reaching, not for love but for rescue. You want control? Mara asked quietly. You've had control for years. You controlled my guilt. You controlled my fear of being a bad mother. You controlled my savings. Jonah's eyes filled. I never wanted. Intentions don't pay bills, Mara said. And they don't erase humiliation. Elise stood abruptly, chair scraping. This is insane. You can't just stop. You're his mother. Mara turned her gaze to Elise. Yes, she said. And that's why I'm stopping. Elise's face hardened. My mother would never do this, Mara nodded once. Then call her. The words were simple, almost gentle. But they knocked the air out of Elise. Jonah froze between them, as if he had been placed in the middle of a bridge and the river beneath was rising. Mara rose too, slowly, feeling every year in her knees, every sacrifice in the ache of her hands. But she didn't feel weak. She felt clear. You have 30 days, she said, voice steady. Your lease ends next month. I won't renew anything. I won't pay another transfer fee. I won't keep feeding a lie that's destroying all of us. Jonah's breath hitched. Mom, where are we supposed to go? Mara's mouth trembled, not with regret, but with something like grief. I don't know, she said. And that's the point. You're grown. You'll figure it out. You have to. Elise's eyes flashed. You're doing this because I hurt your feelings. Mara's laugh came out quiet and tired. No, she said. I'm doing this because you revealed the truth. You revealed that my kindness has been treated like weakness, and my love has been treated like an obligation. Jonah looked at Mara, pleading. Mom, I was going to tell you. When? Mara asked. After the next payment. After the next lie. Jonah's shoulders sagged. And in that sag Mara saw something, fear, yes, but also recognition. A crack in the old pattern. A flicker of understanding that rescue wasn't love if it kept him drowning. The clock ticked on. The custard sat untouched. The spoon lay on the table like a forgotten promise point 2 days later. Mara sat at a kitchen table with a stack of papers spread out like a map of her own mistakes. Bank statements. Transfer confirmations. Notes in her own careful handwriting. Feb. Rent sent. Mar. Rent sent. APR. Rent sent. She stared at the numbers until they stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like hours of her life she could never get back. She had not slept much since the dinner. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Elise's sentence again, felt it slice through her like cold air. Not half the woman. As if womanhood could be measured by income and Instagram photos and minimalist furniture. As if the kind of work Mara had done, the invisible kind, the undervalued kind, wasn't work at all. Her phone buzzed often. Jonah called. Left messages. Sometimes he sounded furious, sometimes devastated, sometimes small. Elise never called, not once. Elise sent one text. This is heartless. Mara read it, set the phone down, and went back to her papers. On the third day, someone else called. The name on the screen made Mara's breath stop in her throat. Evan Hart. It wasn't a name she had spoken out loud in decades. It belonged to a time before Jonah, before marriage, before she became the woman everyone depended on. It belonged to her 20s, to laughter in crowded diners, to late-night talks about places she wanted to see. It belonged to a version of herself that had felt light. She stared at the phone until it nearly went to voicemail. Then, with hands that trembled slightly, she answered, "Mara." The voice on the other end was older, rougher around the edges, but unmistakable. Warm. Certain. Like someone opening a door that had been closed for too long. "Yes," Mara whispered, and the word felt like stepping into sunlight. "I wasn't sure this number would still work," Evan said. This might be strange. I hope it's not unwelcome." Mara looked around her kitchen, at the worn counter, at the teacup she'd used 1,000 times, at the quiet life she had told herself was enough. "It's surprising," she said. "How did you find me?" Evan chuckled softly. "My daughter is relentless. She found you online, traced a few things, and then insisted I call." "Your daughter?" Mara asked. "3 kids," Evan said. "All grown. A grandkid who thinks I'm ancient. And Mara," his voice shifted, softened, "I'm sorry to tell you this over the phone, but my wife passed away 2 years ago." Mara's hand went to her chest. "Oh, Evan. I'm so sorry." "Thank you." He paused, and the silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full. "After she died, I started looking backward more than I used to. Thinking about roads not taken. Thinking about people who mattered." Mara's throat tightened. She wanted to be careful. She wanted to build walls the way she had learned to build them. Quietly, efficiently, without anyone noticing. But a part of her, the part Elise had mocked, the part that had been stitched into duty until it disappeared, leaned forward inside her like a plant turning toward light. "I thought about you," Evan said. "More than I can explain without sounding foolish." "You never sounded foolish," Mara said, and the truth of it surprised her. He exhaled. "I'm in Washington now. Outside Seattle. I built a company years ago, sold it recently. I'm comfortable. But comfort is a strange thing when your house is quiet and the person you used to talk to at night is gone." Mara stared at the bank statements again. Comfort. Quiet. The words felt like the 2 sides of a coin she had never been allowed to hold. Evan continued, "I'm not calling to make you promises. I'm calling because I want to see you. I want to know the woman you became. I want to hear your voice in person, not through a line." Mara's heart beat hard. "Evan," she started, unsure how to say all the reasons it was impossible. Her life. Her son. Her age. Her fear. The way people might look at her like Elise had, as if older women weren't allowed to want anything beyond being useful. So if he could hear the hesitation, Evan added gently, "If you tell me no, I'll accept it. But I had to ask. I had to stop wondering." Mara looked out the window at her small backyard, at the winter bare branches, at the fence she'd repaired herself when Jonah was in college and didn't have time. She thought of the way her body felt when she said yes to everyone. She thought of the strange calm that had come over her the moment she told Elise, "Then call your mother." "What are you asking?" Mara said, voice quiet. Evan's answer was simple, almost careful. "Come visit. A month if you want. A week, if that feels safer. I'll show you the ocean. I'll take you to places you used to talk about. I'll listen. No pressure. Just a chance." Mara's eyes stung. She blinked hard, annoyed at herself for feeling so much, then realized she wasn't annoyed. She was alive. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "You can," Evan said softly, not commanding, just believing. "If you want to." After they hung up, Mara sat at the table for a long time with her hands folded in front of her like a prayer. A month. The ocean. A chance. The words felt unreal, like something that happened to other women, the kind Elise described as successful, the kind who weren't expected to spend their later years cleaning up everyone else's messes. Her phone buzzed again. "Jonah." Mara didn't answer. Not yet. That evening Jonah came to her house. He looked worse than he had at dinner, tired, unshaven, as if he had been sleeping in shallow bursts. He stood on her porch with his hands shoved into his coat pockets, a grown man suddenly unsure how to enter the home he had once run into without knocking. "Mara," he said, and he sounded like a boy again. She opened the door wider but didn't step back fully, not automatically offering him the warmth of immediate forgiveness. Jonah, she replied. He swallowed. Can I come in? Mara hesitated just long enough to make the boundary visible, then nodded. Jonah stepped inside carefully, as if he were walking into a room where the rules had changed. They sat in the kitchen. Mara poured tea because her hands needed something to do. Jonah didn't ask for sugar the way he used to. He stared at the steam rising from the cup as if he could find answers inside it. Elise is at her mother's, Jonah said finally, voice low. Mara didn't respond. She left, Jonah added. She said she can't do this if I don't have money. Mara felt a flicker of satisfaction and didn't pretend she didn't. It wasn't kindness, but it was honesty. Jonah's eyes lifted to hers. I got fired, he admitted. Mara's grip tightened around her mug. When? 2 weeks ago, Jonah said, and his voice cracked. I didn't tell you. I didn't tell Elise. I kept pretending. Mara stared at him, feeling the old reflex surge up. Protect him, fix it, soften it, make a plan. She pressed that reflex down like a lid on boiling water. Why? She asked, and she didn't mean it as a gentle invitation. She meant it as a demand for reality. Jonah's shoulders shook once, then steadied. Because I'm ashamed, he said. Because I didn't want to look like a failure. Because I didn't want Elise to see me the way she sees everything else, like it's disposable if it's not perfect. Mara's eyes narrowed. And how do you think I feel, she asked, after months of paying your rent while you both spent money like it grew on trees? Jonah flinched. I know, he whispered. I know. Mara took a breath. Where have you been sleeping? Jonah hesitated, and the pause told her the truth before he spoke. In my car, he said quietly. 3 nights. Then I found a night job. Cleaning offices. Mara's chest tightened with the instinct to panic, to scold, to cry, to grab her purse and shove cash into his hands. She kept her voice level. And Elise. She thought everything was fine, Jonah said, bitter. I let her buy things. I let her book appointments. I lied. Mara leaned back in her chair and studied her son. Not the child. Not the memory. The adult man who had learned to survive by letting other people carry his weight. I started therapy, Jonah said suddenly, as if the words had been burning his tongue. At the community center. They do a sliding scale. Sometimes free. Mara's eyebrows rose. Therapy. He nodded, eyes wet. I didn't go to make you feel sorry for me. I went because I realized something after that dinner. I realized I've been addicted to being rescued. The phrase landed in Mara's body like a bell. Addicted to being rescued. It explained too much. It explained every crisis that had turned into a plea. Every promise to change that lasted only until life got hard again. Every time Mara had told herself, this is what mothers do, Jonah continued, speaking faster now, as if he had rehearsed the confession and feared losing courage. Every time you saved me, I felt relief. Like a rush. And then I'd go right back to whatever I was doing because the consequence never lasted. It was always softened by you. Mara stared at her tea. The surface trembled slightly. She realized her hands were shaking. I'm not saying it's your fault, Jonah said quickly. It's mine. But it's a pattern. And I don't want to keep living like this. Mara looked up. Then why did you let her speak to me like that? She asked, voice quiet and sharp. Why did you sit there and let her compare me to her mother like I was dirt on her shoe? Jonah's face crumpled. Because I'm weak, he said. Because I was afraid if I defended you, she'd turn that cruelty on me. And I didn't want to lose her. Which is pathetic, because she left anyway. Mara felt a deep, aching sorrow move through her. Sorrow for the boy she raised, for the man he became, for the years she spent trying to fill every gap in his life so he wouldn't fall. Jonah reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. I wrote something, he said, holding it out. It's easier for me to write than to speak. Mara didn't take it immediately. She studied him again, making sure this wasn't another performance designed to open her wallet. I'm not here to ask you to pay, Jonah said, as if he could read her doubt. I'm not here to ask you to stop your decision. I'm here to tell you, you were right. And I'm sorry. Mara's throat tightened. She took the envelope and set it beside her mug, unopened. Jonah wiped his face with the back of his hand. Also, he said, voice cautious, I saw your phone screen when you were walking to the kitchen. A name popped up. Evan. Mara froze, but Jonah's eyes widened slightly, and then he looked away, embarrassed. I didn't mean to pry, but... Evan Hart. That's the name from the old photo album. The one you kept on the top shelf. Mara's heart beat once, hard. She hadn't planned to tell Jonah yet. She hadn't planned to tell anyone. But something about Jonah sitting in her kitchen, finally stripped of his arrogance, made the truth feel possible. He called me, Mara said quietly. Jonah's jaw tightened, but not with anger. With fear. Mom, are you sure it's real? People scam older. Don't, Mara said, sharper than she intended. Jonah stopped instantly. Mara exhaled. I'm being careful, she said. But I know his voice. And he isn't asking for money. He's asking me to visit. Jonah's eyes flicked up, startled. Visit where? Washington, Mara said. The word felt like a door opening. Near Seattle. Jonah stared at her, and Mara saw the old instinct rise up in him too, the instinct to control, to panic, to pull her back into the familiar role of caretaker. She waited. Finally, Jonah whispered, Do you want to go? Mara held his gaze. Yes, she said. Jonah swallowed hard. Are you happy when you talk to him? Mara's eyes burned again. I feel like myself, she admitted. Like I'm more than a bank account and a cook and a fixer. Jonah's shoulders slumped, and then he nodded slowly, as if accepting a truth he had avoided his entire life. Then go, he said, voice rough. Go. I'll figure myself out. Mara didn't believe it fully. Not yet. But the words mattered. And Mom, Jonah added, eyes glistening, I'm sorry I made you disappear. Mara reached for the envelope again, fingers resting on its edge. You didn't do it alone, she said softly. I helped. I let it happen. I thought love meant endless sacrifice. Jonah shook his head. Love means respect, he said. I'm starting to learn that. Mara sat very still, letting the moment settle. Outside the window, the late light faded into the evening. The kitchen felt different. Same walls, same table, but a new kind of air. Mara didn't open the envelope yet. She didn't need to. She already knew the next stitch she had to make in her life, and this time, it would be for herself. Mara waited until Jonah left before she opened the envelope. She had walked him to the door, watched him hesitate on the porch as if he wanted to turn back and ask for something. Money, forgiveness, a reset button, then watched him choose, for once, not to. When his car pulled away, the street went quiet again, and Mara found herself standing in the doorway for a long moment, feeling the house settle around her like an old coat. Familiar. Heavy. Warm. A little too tight in the shoulders. She returned to the kitchen and sat with the envelope beside her tea. Her fingers traced the edge, the way she used to trace seam lines before cutting, wanting to be certain the shape was right. The handwriting on the front looked different than she remembered. Jonah's scribble had always been quick and careless. This was slower, more deliberate, as if he had tried to make each letter stand still long enough to be understood. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The words were plain, no grand poetry, no clever excuses. Jonah wrote about moments Mara had never realized he remembered. How she used to warm his socks on the radiator on winter mornings, how she lied about eating so he would finish the last piece of chicken, how she kept sewing even when her hands cramped because the rent was due and there was no other option. He wrote that he had grown up believing Mara's strength was a natural resource, like sunlight, like air. He wrote that he had treated her love as if it were infinite because it had never stopped. He wrote that Elise's cruelty hadn't come out of nowhere, that he had allowed it, had quietly trained her, without intending to think Mara could be reduced and still be available. He wrote that he didn't know how to defend Mara because he had spent so long defending himself from reality. Then he wrote one line that made Mara close her eyes and press her fingertips against her mouth, as if holding her own breath inside her body. I don't want you to be my safety net anymore. I want you to be my mother and a woman, both. And I want to earn the right to be your son. Mara read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and set it in the small wooden box where she kept important things. Birth certificates, old photographs, a few coins her father had given her when she was a girl. She hesitated over the box, thinking about what important had meant to her all these years. For most of her life, importance meant other people's needs. Tonight, it felt important. It felt like permission. The next morning Mara called Evan. She held the phone close as it rang, her heart moving unevenly in her chest. She wondered if this was foolish, if she was letting loneliness speak louder than common sense. She wondered if she was chasing a version of herself that no longer existed. But the moment Evan's voice came through, calm and surprised and bright with relief, something in Mara steadied. Mara, he said, as if saying her name was something he had practiced. It's me, she replied, and her voice sounded stronger than she felt. I've been thinking. Tell me, Evan said. Mara looked around her kitchen. The window above the sink was streaked faintly from yesterday's rain. The old kettle sat on the stove. A stack of folded dish towels rested near the counter. Ordinary things. The kind of ordinary she had accepted as the boundary of her life. You offered me a visit, she said. A week or a month? Yes, Evan replied carefully. Only if you want. I want, Mara said, and the simplicity of the statement startled her. She was not asking permission. She was not apologizing. A month. There was a pause on the line, filled with something warm. All right, Evan said softly. All right. We'll do it the way you want. I can help with logistics if you'd like, or I can step back and let you handle it. Whatever makes you comfortable. Mara swallowed. I'll handle it, she said. I need to do that. I respect that, Evan replied. When would you come? Mara thought of the calendar on her wall with its neat boxes and small, careful notes. She thought of how often her days were filled with chores she did out of habit rather than choice. She thought of the rent transfer she had scheduled for the 5th, the one she had already cancelled. She thought of the sense of air rushing into a room after a window is opened. Mid-March, she said. Then mid-March, Evan agreed, as if the date was a promise. I'll be at the airport. After the call ended, Mara sat for a moment in silence, hearing only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of a neighbor's dog barking in the distance. She waited for guilt to rush in and punish her. She waited for fear. She waited for the voice inside her that always asked, what about Jonah? What about your responsibilities? What about what people will say? The guilt came, but it didn't roar the way it used to. It arrived like a tired visitor. Mara looked at it and felt, strangely, less afraid. She understood now that guilt had been her leash for years. Love didn't need a leash. 2 hours later, Jonah called. Mara answered this time. Mom, Jonah said quickly, his voice brittle. Elise is threatening. She's saying she'll tell everyone you're abandoning us. She's saying, let her, Mara replied. Jonah fell silent. Mara could hear his breathing. You, he began. You're serious. Mara leaned her elbow on the table and watched the morning sunlight shift across the floor. Yes, she said. I'm serious. Jonah exhaled slowly, as if he were learning how to breathe in a new world. I can't lie, he said. Part of me hoped you'd soften, that you'd calm down and decide you didn't mean it. I meant it, Mara said gently. Jonah's voice cracked. I don't blame you. Mara closed her eyes. The words should have felt like relief, but they landed with weight. Because if Jonah didn't blame her, then he was accepting reality. And acceptance meant there was no illusion left to hide behind. I called Evan, Mara said. There was another pause. And? Jonah asked. I'm going, Mara said. For a month. Jonah didn't respond immediately. Mara imagined him sitting somewhere, maybe in his car, maybe on the edge of a mattress in a rented room, staring at the steering wheel or the wall while his mind tried to adjust. Finally Jonah said, "Are you sure?" Mara's mouth curved slightly. "No," she said honestly. "But I'm going anyway." Jonah let out a breath that sounded like both fear and admiration. Then, "Okay," he said. "Okay. I'll make it work. I have to." "You do," Mara agreed. He hesitated. "Mom," he said softer, "I want to do something right for once. Can I drive you to the airport when the time comes?" Mara thought about it. The old Mara would have said yes immediately, grateful for any scrap of closeness. The new Mara weighed the request, not as a test, but as a choice. "Yes," she said. "You can." Jonah's voice wobbled. "Thank you." After she hung up, Mara stood at the sink and washed a cup that was already clean, just to feel the movement in her hands. Outside, a car passed. A bird landed on the fence and then flew away. Life continued with or without her permission. For decades, Mara had lived as if her only job was to keep other people from falling. Now she was learning that she had her own gravity, her own direction. Over the next weeks, the house became a place of sorting. Mara moved through rooms like someone preparing for a different life, not by throwing everything away, but by choosing what mattered. She gathered old letters, charity receipts, photographs, her sewing patterns that still smelled faintly of fabric dust. She found a small notebook from her 20s in a drawer she hadn't opened in years. The pages were filled with dreams written in a younger hand. See the ocean, ride a ferry, learn to paint, take a train across states, eat seafood fresh from the dock. She sat on the floor with the notebook and laughed quietly, then cried, then laughed again. Not because her dreams were foolish, but because they had waited so patiently for her. Elise texted twice. The first message accused Mara of cruelty. The second message accused her of acting like a teenager. Mara didn't reply. There was nothing to explain to someone who only understood love as leverage. When March arrived, it came with a strange tenderness. Mara woke each morning with the same house around her, but the air felt different, lighter, as if the walls themselves had noticed she was moving. The morning of her flight, Jonah arrived early. He stood in the doorway holding a bouquet of daisies. Mara blinked, surprised, then took them carefully. Daisies had always been her favorite because they looked simple but survived almost anywhere. "You remembered," she said. Jonah's face tightened with emotion. "I'm trying," he replied. He carried her suitcase to the car. On the drive to the airport, he didn't talk much at first. He kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel, as if he was afraid that if he looked at Mara too long he would fall apart. They passed familiar streets. The bakery Mara used to visit on Sundays. The park where Jonah had learned to ride a bike. The grocery store where Mara had once calculated every penny and still smiled at the cashier. Mara watched the scenery with calm eyes. She was not leaving because she hated this place. She was leaving because she finally understood she could the airport. Jonah walked her to the security line. He hovered beside her as if his body didn't know how to stop protecting her, even though he had rarely protected her when it mattered. "Mara," he said suddenly, and the use of her name rather than Mom startled her. She looked at him. "I know I've said sorry before," he whispered. "But this time I mean it differently. This time I mean it with," he swallowed hard, "with change. Not just with words." Mara studied his face. He looked older than his 35 years. But there was something else there too, a raw seriousness, like a man who had been forced to meet himself for the first time. "Show me," Mara said simply. Jonah nodded, tears shining in his eyes. He pulled an envelope from his coat. "Don't open it until you're on the plane," he said, voice shaking. Mara took it. "All right." They hugged them tightly, the way they had not hugged in years. Jonah's arms were strong and Mara felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was holding her without taking anything. "I love you," Jonah whispered. "I love you too," Mara said. "And I'm proud of you for standing in the discomfort." Jonah gave a small, broken laugh. "That's a very Mara thing to say." She smiled. "Good," she replied. "Because I'm trying to be myself again." When Mara reached her seat on the plane, she placed the envelope on her lap and waited until the aircraft began to taxi. Only then did she open it. The letter inside was shorter than the first. Jonah wrote that he had begun to recognize moments from his childhood not as normal mother things, but as sacrifices that had shaped the entire foundation of his life. He wrote about the time she stayed up all night mending his coat before a school trip. He wrote about how he had assumed she didn't mind going without, because she never complained. He wrote that he finally understood that complaining wasn't the only way pain could exist. Then, at the end, Jonah wrote one sentence that made Mara press her fingers to her mouth again. Fly high, Mara. Not to escape us. To find you. Mara folded the letter and looked out the window as the plane lifted. The ground fell away. Streets turned into lines, houses into small blocks of color, everything she had known shrinking into the distance. She expected grief to hit her like a wave. Instead, she felt something that was almost unfamiliar, quiet excitement. When she landed in Seattle, the air smelled different, damp and green, like earth that remembered rain. The airport was busy, full of rolling suitcases and voices, but Mara moved through it as if she had a private bubble around her, a new kind of focus. Evan stood near the arrivals area holding a bouquet of yellow flowers. He was taller than Mara remembered, or maybe she was shorter now. His hair was white, his face lined, but his eyes were the same, steady, attentive, amused by life even when it hurt. When he saw her, his expression softened into a smile that made Mara's chest tighten. Mara, he said quietly, as if he wanted to keep the moment safe from noise. Evan, she replied. They hugged. It wasn't the tight, desperate hug of people trying to reclaim lost decades in one squeeze. It was a careful hug, respectful, like two people acknowledging that time had changed them but not erased what mattered. You made it, Evan said, stepping back to look at her. You look radiant. Mara laughed softly, embarrassed but pleased. It's the airport lighting, she teased. Evan's eyes warmed. It's you, he corrected. He carried her suitcase without asking permission. Mara let him, because the gesture didn't feel like control. It felt like care. They walked out to his car. The sky was gray, but the city looked alive beneath it as they drove. Evan pointed out small things. Mountains faint in the distance, neighborhoods tucked into hills, a glimpse of water flashing between buildings. Mara watched it all like someone relearning wonder. Evan's house sat in a quiet neighborhood with trees and a view that made Mara stop in the driveway and stare. Beyond the yard, the water stretched out, a wide, moving surface that reflected the sky like a mirror. The ocean, Mara whispered. Not the full Pacific, Evan said, smiling. But water, yes. Tomorrow we'll go farther. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and wood. There were books everywhere, stacked on shelves and tables like old friends. A vase sat on the counter, ready for the flowers Evan carried in. The home felt lived in, not staged. Warm, not perfect. It made Mara's shoulders drop without her even realizing she had been holding them up. Evan showed her a guest room with fresh sheets and a quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. On the bedside table sat a small notebook and pen. In case you still write, Evan said. Mara's throat tightened. I used to, she admitted. Then maybe you will again, Evan replied. That evening, they sat on the deck wrapped in blankets. Evan brewed tea and listened as Mara spoke about her life, not in dramatic confession, but in honest pieces. She told him about sewing until her fingers ached. She told him about Jonah's father, a good man who had loved her in his own way but had also grown used to her being the caretaker. She told him about Elise's cruelty and Jonah's weakness and the way Mara had mistaken endurance for virtue. Evan didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix her story. He didn't treat her pain like an inconvenience. He just listened, the way he used to listen when they were young and Mara would talk about dreams with hands that still believed in them. When Mara finished, she expected Evan to offer advice or pity. Instead, he said, You didn't fail because you loved too much. You failed because you were taught love should cost you your entire self. Mara stared out at the water. The sky deepened into evening. Somewhere in the distance, a gull called. I don't want to be bitter, Mara said. Evan nodded. Then don't, he replied. Be free. Bitterness is still a chain. The days that followed were gentle, then surprising, then quietly transformative. Evan drove Mara along the coast where the ocean opened up wide and undeniable. Mara stood on damp sand with wind whipping at her hair, and she laughed out loud like a girl. The sound startled her. It sounded like someone who still had time. Evan introduced Mara to his grown children in slow, respectful steps. They didn't treat her like an intruder. They treated her like a person. One of his daughters hugged Mara and said, "Dad's been lighter lately. Thank you for that." Mara didn't know what to do with gratitude that wasn't transactional. She held it carefully, like a fragile cup night. Mara began to write in the notebook Evan had left in her room. At first she wrote in short bursts, unsure how to start. Then words began to come more easily. She wrote about the feel of fabric between her fingers. She wrote about the women who had cried in her shop while being fitted for wedding dresses. About the secrets people told seamstresses because needles made confession feel normal. She wrote about her own life, not as tragedy, but as a story that deserved to be told. One evening, 3 weeks into her visit, Evan brought 2 glasses of sparkling water onto the deck and sat beside her. "Mara," he said quietly. She turned. "I've been thinking," Evan continued. He looked out at the water, then back at her. "I don't want to rush you. I don't want to make promises we don't understand yet. But I also don't want to pretend I don't feel what I feel." Mara's heart beat hard. She kept her voice steady. "And what do you feel?" Evan smiled softly. "That I'm grateful you came. That I like having you here. He paused, searching for the right words, then chose honesty over elegance. That I don't want this to end just because the calendar says a month is up." Mara's breath caught. Evan continued, carefully. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm not asking you to move in. I'm asking you to consider staying longer, or coming back, or building something slow and real, if you want it." Mara stared at him. For a moment, she saw her old fear rise, the fear that love would demand sacrifice again, that attachment would mean losing herself again. But Evan's gaze didn't demand. It said, "What if it doesn't work?" Mara asked, voice quiet. Evan's eyes warmed. "Then we'll have had something beautiful," he said. "And we'll both be older and wiser for it." "But Mara, what if it does work? What if you get to be happy without paying for it for your whole life?" Mara looked out at the water again, watching the last light fade into the ocean like a ribbon. She thought of Jonah, of his letters, of his trembling voice at the airport. She thought of Elise's contempt. She thought of the quiet inside her own house, the quiet that used to feel like a punishment and now felt like a choice. She turned back to Evan. "I need to tell Jonah," she said. Evan nodded. "Of course." That night, Mara called Jonah from the guest room. She sat on the edge of the bed with the phone pressed to her ear, her heart beating with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. Jonah answered on the second ring. "Mom, Mara," he corrected himself quickly. "How are you?" Mara smiled. "Good," she said. "Really good." Jonah's voice softened. "I'm glad." Mara inhaled. "Evan asked me something." Jonah went quiet. "What?" "He asked me to consider staying longer," Mara said. "Maybe moving here eventually." Jonah's breath caught. "Wow." Mara waited, bracing for protest, guilt, manipulation. She had learned to expect those. Instead, Jonah said, "Are you happy?" "Yes," Mara answered, and her voice broke slightly with the truth of it. "Happier than I've been in years." Jonah was silent a moment longer, then he whispered, "Then stay." Mara's eyes filled. "Jonah, Mara," he said gently, "you gave me everything. And I used you. I don't want to be the reason you stay small. If you can be big now, be big." Mara pressed her hand to her mouth. "I don't want to lose you," she admitted. "You won't," Jonah replied, voice steady. "Not if I do this right." Mara exhaled slowly. "I want to believe you," she said. "Then watch me," Jonah replied. "I got extra shifts. I'm still going to therapy. and Elise filed for separation. Mara's chest tightened. How do you feel? Jonah laughed bitterly. Terrible. Relieved. Ashamed. All of it. But it's real now. No more pretending. Mara closed her eyes. Good, she whispered. Real is better. They spoke for another few minutes, not in dramatic declarations, but in a new tone. Two adults trying to build something healthier out of rubble. When Mara ended the call, she sat for a long time with the phone in her lap. Outside the window, the night was quiet and wide. She realized that the story she had thought ended at 70 was not ending at all. It was unfolding. Mara went downstairs and found Evan in the kitchen rinsing dishes. He looked up when she entered. Well, he asked softly. Mara smiled, small but bright. He told me to stay, she said. Evan's face softened. Then, what do you want? Mara paused, feeling the weight of the question, not heavy, but significant. The weight of choice. I want to live, she said. And I want to live without being punished for it. Evan stepped toward her, not rushing, just present. Then we'll do it that way, he said. Mara nodded, and for the first time in a long time, she felt certain of something that didn't involve sacrifice. She felt certain of her own right to exist fully. Mara stayed. The decision didn't arrive with fireworks or a dramatic announcement. It settled into her life quietly, like a piece of furniture that had always belonged in the room. She extended her return ticket twice, then cancelled it altogether. Evan didn't pressure her. He simply made space, literal space in his home, emotional space in their days, so that Mara could decide who she was becoming without feeling watched or weighed. Spring unfolded around them slowly. Trees bloomed in shades Mara had never learned the names for. The air smelled like rain and earth and possibility. Mara learned the rhythm of Evan's mornings, the way he hummed absently while making coffee, the way he paused mid-sentence to watch birds on the railing. Evan learned the small habits Mara carried with her, the way she folded napkins even when no one asked, the way she touched door frames as she passed, as if grounding herself in place. They cooked together most evenings. Evan didn't expect Mara to take over the kitchen. When she reached for a towel out of reflex, he smiled and gently took it from her hands. When she apologized for seasoning something wrong, he laughed and said, "There is no wrong. They're just different. Different." The word followed Mara around like a promise. She spent her mornings walking along the shoreline, breathing in salt air and watching the tide pull itself forward and back. She spent afternoons writing, sometimes for hours, sometimes for a single paragraph that exhausted her. The words were no longer about sacrifice alone. They were about texture, color, and choice. About the way women like her became invisible not because they disappeared, but because everyone learned to look through them. One afternoon, Evan found her sitting on the deck with her notebook open and tears running quietly down her face. He didn't rush to her. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply sat beside her, his presence steady. "I'm angry," Mara said finally, her voice raw. Evan nodded. "Good." She turned to him, startled. "Good." "Yes," he said calmly. "Anger is information. It means you're finally noticing where you were hurt." Mara stared out at the water. "I'm angry at myself," she admitted. "I taught Jonah that my love had no limits. I taught him I would erase myself for him. And then I was shocked when he let me." Evan listened. "I'm angry that Elise's words hurt me so deeply," Mara continued. "Because part of me believed them. Part of me thought I really wasn't enough." Evan shook his head slowly. "You built an entire life out of nothing but skill and endurance. People confuse money with worth because it's easier than learning how to value labor that doesn't brag." Mara let out a shaky breath. "I don't want to hate them." "You don't have to," Evan said. "You just don't have to carry them." That night, Mara dreamed of sewing again. Not frantic, late-night sewing, but slow, deliberate stitching. When she woke, she felt lighter. Jonah called every Sunday, he first. The calls were stiff. Updates delivered like reports. New job hours. Therapy sessions. Budget spreadsheets. Jonah was proving himself, methodically, as if afraid that any emotional vulnerability would pull him back into old habits. Mara listened without interrupting. She didn't praise excessively. She didn't rescue. Over time, Jonah's voice changed. It lost its edge of desperation. He began to speak about work frustrations without panic, about small successes without needing approval. He told her once that he had been tempted to quit his cleaning job after a supervisor criticized him harshly, then paused and said, "But I didn't. I went back the next day. And it didn't kill me." Mara smiled softly into the phone. "No," she said. "It won't." One Sunday, Jonah admitted something that made Mara sit very still. "I ran into Elise," he said quietly. "She's dating someone older. Wealthy." Mara waited. "She told me I wasted my potential," Jonah continued. "She said if I had tried harder, she wouldn't have left." Mara felt the old protective instinct stir, but she kept her voice calm. "And what did you say?" Jonah exhaled. "I told her she was right about one thing. I wasted my potential. But not the way she thinks. I wasted it by letting other people live my life for me." Mara closed her eyes, pride swelling quietly in her chest. "That sounds like growth," she said. Jonah laughed softly. "It feels terrible and good at the same time." "That's usually how it goes," Mara replied. Summer approached. Evan asked Mara a question one evening that surprised her with its simplicity. "Would you like to move here permanently?" he asked. "Not for me. For you." Mara didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window and looked at the water, at the boats drifting in the distance. "I still have a house," she said slowly. "A whole life back there." "Yes," Evan said. "And you're allowed to choose which parts you bring forward." Mara thought of her old kitchen, the table scarred with years of use, the walls heavy with memories. She thought of the quiet there, the kind that used to feel like abandonment and now felt like closure. "I don't want to run away," she said. Evan nodded. "Then don't. Walk toward something." That night, Mara lay awake thinking not of fear, but of logistics. Of selling her house. Of packing what mattered. Of choosing. 2 weeks later, she booked a flight back, not to return to her old life, but to close it properly. Jonah met her at the airport again. This time, he looked different. Straighter. Calmer. Less like someone waiting to be caught. "You look happy," he said as they hugged. "I am," Mara replied. They drove to her house together. The rooms greeted her like old companions. Familiar, but no longer demanding. Mara walked through them slowly, touching walls, opening drawers, acknowledging the years she had lived there fully. Jonah watched her carefully, saying little. "I'm going to sell it," Mara said eventually. Jonah nodded. "That makes sense." "I'm not giving it to you," she added gently. Jonah met her eyes. "I wouldn't accept it." They both smiled at the same time, surprised by the symmetry of growth. Over the next week, Mara sorted her belongings with intention. She donated what she no longer needed. She kept what told her story. She found her sewing machine and ran her fingers over it, remembering nights of exhaustion and pride. She decided to bring it with her, not to return to survival sewing, but because creating still mattered. One afternoon, Jonah sat on the floor surrounded by old photo albums. "You know," he said, holding up a picture of Mara in her 30s, hair tied back, laughing mid-sentence, "I don't remember you laughing like this." Mara looked at the photo. "I did," she said softly. "Just not when you were watching." Jonah swallowed. "I wish I had." Mara knelt beside him. "You see me now," she said. "That's enough." Before she left again, Mara visited Jonah's small rented room downtown. It was modest but clean. Sparse, but intentional. "This is mine," Jonah said quietly. "All mine." Mara nodded. "I'm proud of you." Jonah looked at her, emotion thick in his voice. "I'm proud of you too." When Mara returned to Seattle, she felt something click into place. Autumn arrived gently. The leaves turned gold and red. Mara and Evan settled into routines that felt mutual rather than expected. Mara wrote every morning. Evan read her pages without critique, only curiosity. He asked questions that made her think, not defend. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Evan asked, "Would you consider marrying me?" Mara didn't laugh. She didn't panic. She studied his face. "Why?" she asked. Evan smiled. "Because I love you. Because I want to choose you every day. And because I don't want you to feel like this chapter is temporary." Mara took his hand. "I won't marry you to be safe," she said. "I won't marry you to belong." "I know," Evan replied. "I'll marry you because I want to," Mara said. "Because I finally know the difference." They married the following spring on a quiet beach. Evan's children stood beside them. Jonah stood across from Mara, tears streaming down his face without embarrassment. When Evan took Mara's hands, he said, "I promise to walk with you, not ahead of you and not behind you." Mara replied, "I promise to never disappear again." After the ceremony, Jonah hugged Mara fiercely. "I never thought I'd see you marry for love," he said. Mara smiled. "Neither did I." Years passed, not dramatically, but richly. Jonah advanced in his career. He struggled. He failed. He recovered. He called Mara for advice and accepted her answers without turning them into obligations. Sometimes he just called to talk. Sometimes Mara visited him. Sometimes he visited her. Their relationship was no longer built on rescue. It was built on respect. Elise became a distant footnote. Not a villain, not a lesson, just a person who had revealed a truth Mara needed to see. Mara finished a book. Evan helped her find a small publisher. Readers wrote letters saying they felt seen, understood, named. Women her age wrote to say they thought it was too late, and now they weren't so sure. One afternoon, sitting on the deck watching the ocean roll endlessly forward, Mara reflected on the night Elise had spoken those words that once felt like knives. "You're not half the woman my mother is." Mara smiled. She was not half a woman. She was whole. And she had finally learned that it was never too late to start living as one.